Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to the speaker series at the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm Brent Cotter, a professor at the College of Law and a member of the Canadian Senate, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this second episode of Re-Envisioning Policing in Canada. This series is presented as part of the McKercher LLP lecture series at the College of Law at the University of Saskatchewan. As we gather virtually today, I acknowledge that I am on Treaty 6 territory in the homeland of the Métis. We pay our respect to First Nation and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationship with one another. I'd like to begin by thanking McKercher LLP for sponsoring this lecture series. This year's events may look a little different, both online and without a live audience, but we promise the topics will not only be informative and educational, but also relevant to what's happening in the world today. David Stack, QC, is a partner in the Saskatoon office of McKercher LLP, where he practices in the areas of civil litigation, administrative law, employment and labor law, corporate and commercial law. He's recorded some welcoming remarks, and we'll play those for you now.
McKercher LLP has had the privilege of being a proud supporter of this lecture series since its start in 2014. The decision to support the College of Law in these lectures was an easy one for us, as we understand firsthand the great job that the college does in educating and preparing successful lawyers. Education, knowledge, and innovation are crucial in securing the future success of our province. Our support for this initiative provides a catalyst for provoking thought, enhancing collaboration, and engaging future leaders. With the transition of these lectures to the virtual format, we hope that this will provide an even greater opportunity for the College of Law to enlighten and engage students, lawyers, and our community on these important topics. Stay safe, be well, and enjoy.
Thank you, David. Today, I'm joined by Harold R. Johnson, Cree author and lawyer. Harold Johnson is the author of 5 works of fiction and 3 works of nonfiction. His most recent books are Clifford and Firewater, How Alcohol is Killing My People and Yours, which was a finalist for the Governor-General's Literary Award for Nonfiction. I thought Harold's book was going to win. He was up against this year Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin's memoir of her life and career in the law. I guess if you're going to not win, it's okay to lose out to Chief Justice McLaughlin. Harold himself was born and raised in northern Saskatchewan and was a member of the Canadian Navy and worked at mining and logging before graduating from Harvard Law School. Harold spends much of his time in the north, connected to his community and Indigenous ways of living. And as you will see, you will only be able to not see, that is, hear Harold speak. The ability to get high-quality connected video didn't work for him, a reminder that we have challenges in trying to extend those kinds of services to all of the communities of our country. Nevertheless, you will find Harold to be a vibrant and insightful speaker. I had the opportunity of hearing Harold speak a couple of years ago to a very conventional audience of lawyers and judges, and it was a riveting experience. I think you will see the same today. Harold himself managed a private practice for several years and then became a Crown prosecutor. He is a member of the Montreal Lake Cree Nation and lives on his family trapline with his wife, Joan. Please welcome Harold Johnson.
Thank you for that introduction, Mr. Cotter. We're talking about policing. My experiences in northern Saskatchewan, where I was a Crown prosecutor for 10 years. What we have to talk about primarily is trauma. The population in northern Saskatchewan is highly traumatized. As a Crown prosecutor, I handled about 1,500 files a year. 1,000 of those files would have documented a trauma of some sort, not just the victim, the woman who got beaten up, but also the 5 children who watched and the offender. We're learning that offenders, 95% of men in jail were physically or sexually assaulted when they were children, and 97% of women in prison were physically or sexually assaulted as children. So the offender is one of the traumatized members of our population. My 1,000 files a year documenting multiple traumas, if you multiply that times 11 prosecutors for Northern Saskatchewan, we have 11,000 files per year, each documenting multiple traumas, and there's only 37,000 people here. It doesn't take long until that population is traumatized multiple times. So we have a highly traumatized population interacting with the police force. The police force is also traumatized. I've got two stories from police officers. One is a male officer who left the force. And he left the force, he told me, after an experience in the northern community. He was called, him and his partner, to remove Joe from a house. They got there. Joe was drunk. He was a large man, and he did not have a shirt on. And when they asked Joe to kindly leave the residence where he was no longer welcome, Joe refused. The two officers tried to force Joe out of the house, and it ended up that all three of them were on the floor. Two officers trying to wrestle Joe into handcuffs. During the wrestling match, this officer looked up, and there were three little boys sitting on a couch. And they weren't watching Joe being wrestled by the police officers. They were leaning over to look around them at the television. They were watching cartoons. And to this male officer, as he was telling me, he interpreted that as those children were so used to seeing violence that they didn't even pay attention to it anymore. And that impacted him to the point that he left the force. The other story comes from a woman officer in the far north. She'd been called to a house, and it was obvious that something horrible had happened there. There was blood on the floor, there was blood splatters on the walls, there was broken furniture and broken glass. And the little children, 5 and 6-year-olds, were asking her for the stickers that the police gave out as part of their community engagement. And to her, those children who must have seen something horrendous to behave that way showed her that, again, the children were so used to the violence that it didn't impact on them anymore. I know those two officers were wrong and that the children were just trying to find some normalcy in the horror that they were watching or had seen. I know several police officers now who are on leave because of stress, PTSD. So we have a highly traumatized population in northern Saskatchewan interacting with the traumatized police force. And we can't expect good results. Both populations, the police, the civilians, are self-medicating the trauma with alcohol. Alcohol is very good at covering up all of the symptoms of PTSD. It alleviates all of them. The problem is in the side effects. You need more and more alcohol to get the same results as you develop a tolerance to it. And you know that alcohol, more violence, more trauma, more grief, more suffering. And both police and civilians are using to self-medicate. There are good police out there. I've met several. I know police officers that I interacted with who, if they told me that the sky was falling, I wouldn't look out the window to check. That's how honest and ethical these officers were. And I'd often have them on the witness stand, and they would tell the truth no matter what, even if it sunk my case for me. There are those kinds of officers out there. There are also assholes. There are power-hungry, violent officers on the force. People who are looking to create a reputation for themselves as tough guys. They're there. I can't give you numbers or percentages of which officers are good guys and which ones are assholes. There's a number of both. It doesn't seem to matter. We have to deal with both of them. We're never going to get rid of all of the assholes from the force. Hopefully we can keep all of the good guys. We have to figure out some way of working through what's happening on the ground up there. Or up here. Talking about trauma in northern Saskatchewan, we have 326 RCMP officers to police 37,000 people. So imagine a small city like Moose Jaw or Lloydminster or Prince Albert, each with 300 police officers. The crime rate in those cities would be extreme, having 300 police officers at work. And when they're at work, their job is to lay charges. So they will be laying charges. The more charges they lay, statistically, the crime rate goes up. So our numbers in northern Saskatchewan look like we need a lot more police because there's a lot of charges laid. And the reason there's a lot of charges laid is because there's a lot of police. We need 326 trauma counselors. We need to start looking at fixing the problems that we know exist here. Every time we as Aboriginal people in northern Saskatchewan ask for help with the violence, the substance use, the suicides, we could send more police. Sending more police is like sending more buckets to fix a leaking roof. We've got a lot going on up here, a lot of good things happening. But we've got this other dynamic that seems to be tearing everything down. And it doesn't just end at the policing level. We have to talk about everything. Police are part of the communities. Right now, police officers make up almost 1% of the population of northern Saskatchewan. So they're part of our communities. And the justice system, with its reliance on incarceration as a solution to all of our problems, is making things worse for us. As a Crown prosecutor, I knew that when I asked the judge to send this man to a provincial correctional center, that man was going to come back to the community in less than 2 years, and he was going to come back angry. And if I asked the judge to send that man to a federal institution, he was going to come back to the community, and he'd come back angry and mean. And I told myself several stories as a prosecutor, and one of the ones that I told myself the most was that I was helping the community by asking the judge to send this man away. He was a bad actor, and he was disrupting the community. And by sending him to jail, the community was getting a reprieve from his bad actions. And in the back of my mind, I and everybody else knew that we were making this man more of a menace to his community by sending him to jail. We know that jail or a criminal record that involves incarceration is a predictor of recidivism, criminal activity. People who have been to jail are more likely to commit an offense than people who have not been to jail. So by sending people to jail, we are turning them into what we refer to as criminals. We're making them that way. And everyone in the justice system knows this. We know it because at bail hearings, if we don't want someone to get released from custody, prosecutors frequently show the judge the person's criminal record, and if there's jail on it, we know that it's very unlikely that the person's going to get released from custody at a bail hearing. We know this, and we've known it for a long time. We know that jail makes offenders worse. Yet we try to tell ourselves that jail is a deterrent and that people that we send to jail are going to be less likely to commit offenses. That's the lie that we tell ourselves. And it doesn't help. We're actually making our communities worse. When we talk about incarceration, when we send people away out of our communities and they come back, they bring back jailhouse culture. We've been incarcerating people, Aboriginal people in this province, since about 1960. 1960 in Saskatchewan, Aboriginal people got the right to vote and the right to go into a bar. And since then, the incarceration rates of Aboriginal people have continued to climb steadily, and nothing that we have done in the justice system has made any difference. By 1990, we recognized that there was a problem in the over-incarceration of Indigenous people. In 1995, Government of Canada changed the criminal code, inserting Section 718(2)E, telling judges to take into account the unique circumstances of Aboriginal people at sentencing and to use jail as a last resort. And nothing changed. The incarceration rates continued to go up. 1999, Supreme Court came down with the decision of R versus Gladue. And in that decision, the Supreme Court told judges across Canada that they had to pay attention to the criminal code provision. And they spelled out which unique circumstances of Aboriginal people judges were to take into account in sentencing. But nothing changed. The incarceration rates continued to climb. I was a defense attorney at about that time, and I can remember making a Gladue argument in provincial court, the sentencing of my client. And I know that judge gave my client a longer sentence because I dared to make those arguments. The Supreme Court came down with the decision of R versus Ipaley in about 2012. And there they told judges quite bluntly to damn well pay attention to the decision in Gladue. And nothing changed. The incarceration rates continued to climb. Today, we're locking up more women and children than at any time before. And nothing that we do, tinkering with the system, has made any difference. And the more we send people to jail, the more Aboriginal people that we take out of communities and put into jail and teach them jailhouse culture, the more damaged our communities become. So we've got generations now of people who've been taken away and incarcerated. And in jail, they learn The institution is going to feed you, it's going to clothe you, it's going to give you shelter, it's going to give you a bed. You learn to disrespect authority. You learn that violence solves problems. You learn that the tough guy is the leader. And then our people have brought this jailhouse culture back to the communities. And when they get out and come back, they swagger around, acting all tough. They badmouth chief and council when they don't get a house right away. And we've got youth now who think that jailhouse culture is Aboriginal culture. We've got to find some way to stop this cycle, to let Aboriginal culture in its original form regrow and reassert itself in our communities. That's where justice has to be. That's where policing is in the communities. That's where the victims are. That's where the offenders are. But the justice system does not take into account community realities. As a prosecutor, I made arguments that the judge should take into account the perspective of the community, and was told bluntly that the judge would not take into account community concerns because those were not justice concerns. What we deal with in justice is the accused and the rights of the accused. We don't consider anything to do with community, what the community needs, or what a healthy community looks like. Damaged communities produce damaged people. The justice system takes those damaged people, runs them through the system, damages them some more, and sends them back into the community. In that interaction of damaged communities, we have often damaged police officers interacting in that community. And we can expect the violence that we see. We can expect the distrust that is common. We can figure out ways of doing this better. We bring police in from outside who have often no connection to the community, and that's on purpose. We don't want, the force doesn't want police who are connected to the community policing the community. But that's not how communities work. If we had a new officer come into a community, what I'd recommend is for the community to hold a feast, bring the new officer before the community, celebrate their arrival, and have a ceremony like an adoption ceremony where we adopt the officer into the community and make him a member of the community. And as a ceremony, everyone in the community come up and shake the officer's hand. Just a ceremony. Just a touching of flesh, connecting them to the people. That's how community works. That's how it fits together. We can't have a police force or actors in the community acting from outside of the community. That doesn't make community stronger. Strong communities will produce strong people, and we'll have less need for police. So this idea of adopting police officers into the community works really well in would work really well in northern Saskatchewan, where we have band offices and where we do get together and hold feasts. Would it work in the city? Or possibly. The community in the city is there. We can find them at friendship centers and other places within the city where those adoption ceremonies could take place. It's possible. It wouldn't be as easy as we could do it in the north, but it's possible in the city. Identifying the community is what's going to take some effort. I just saw a statistic a while ago that 60% of the work of our CMP officers is in dealing with Aboriginal people. It's across the whole country. 60% of a police officer's work in the city is likely dealing with Aboriginal people. We're the ones who fill up provincial court. Just go down to the courthouse on any day and look in a docket, see who's there. In cities of 250,000 people, and the majority of them sitting on docket are Aboriginal people. We know the community that is being policed the most, and it's the Aboriginal community. It's an identifiable community, and it does gather as elders and knowledge keepers and leaders. We know every community has leaders in it, community champions. They're rarely the elected. Community champions tend to be the workers in a community. They're the ones that get things done. In northern communities, they're easily identifiable. Just attend any feast, any wedding, any place that organizing is taking place, and you'll find the community leaders, community champions. I'm not as familiar with cities as I am with northern communities, but I'm sure that those community champions exist in cities as well. So connection between the police and the community champions, the real leaders. And they're often young, and they're frequently women. So it might take some adjusting in perspective, because the Western world tends to see men as leaders, but in the Aboriginal community, the real leaders tend to be younger women. Those are the ones who are getting things done, making sure things happen. We have to talk about police violence at some point. I'm talking here in Saskatchewan, and police are part of the fabric of this province. They are part of the people of this province. And we've got a real problem here with hatred. It's the story that people tell themselves about Aboriginal people. That they're lazy, dirty drunks. They get everything for nothing. And that they're thieves, and that they're dangerous. And then there's the story of the gangs, the prostitution, and the drugs. And those are the stories that white settler folk tell themselves about us. And we saw in the Gerald Stanley trial where that leads. There's racism all over. And a couple of decades ago, when I was arguing that Saskatchewan is a racist place, I was told I was imagining it. That I was just seeing things. In the last few years, it's erupted and it's out in the open. And you can see the racism and the hatred in the comment sections on any news report that deals with Aboriginal people. It's there and it's blatant. And in my experience, the most racist department in government is Saskatchewan Environment and Resource Management officers. And I was really surprised when the Métis got their hunting rights recognized by the Supreme Court. Saskatchewan issued sidearms to conservation officers. And I was wondering, what are you doing? Are you trying to start something? And then after the Gerald Stanley decision, the province of Saskatchewan issued conservation officers assault rifles. And I knew, yeah, this government is getting ready for a race war. And they're stirring it up. Somebody wants something horrible to happen here. And we've got racists in Saskatchewan Environment and Resource Management. We've got racist haters in the police force. And they're heavily armed. And because of the stories they tell themselves, they're afraid. We've got police officers in northern communities who refuse to answer a call if they have to go alone because they're afraid. They will not attend a call unaccompanied by another officer. They need backup. And what they're primarily being called to are disputes, traumatized people erupting because of the trauma, because of their fight, flight, or freeze symptoms that they carry with them because they were traumatized and then live in a traumatic community. Perpetuates violence. And we're not seeming to figure out how it is we're going to live together here. How we're going to heal the rifts that a political class is using for political benefit. So we've got a Saskatchewan party who will never tell their constituencies to cut the racist rhetoric, because that's their base. That's who votes for them. And they're not going to tell them to cut it out. They're going to continue to feed on it because it's to their political advantage. I don't expect the opposition party to make much change either. They refuse to call out the racists and the haters because they're afraid of the backlash. And so we as a society in this province just live with it. Just accept the hate. Accept the racism. It's becoming part of the fabric of this place. We have to find a way to solve the problem of over-incarceration of Aboriginal people in Saskatchewan and in Canada. We have to figure this out. And it's not going to be done by the politicians or by judges. We've been holding conferences for 50 years on the over-incarceration of Aboriginal people. McKercher spoke at the last Justice conference that I attended, And Ovid said the first conference he went to was in 1970. It was on a boat on Lake Winnipeg, and they were talking about Indians and the justice system. That's 50 years. 50 years we've been coming together in hotels, in cities, and our top thinkers, judges, deputy ministers of justice, our top lawyers, academics, and we sit and we talk about Aboriginal people in the justice system. And they serve hors d'oeuvres. And there's usually choice between red or white wine at supper. And we talk and talk and talk. And nothing changes. In the last conference I was at in Winnipeg in the wintertime, and I just gave up. There was nothing left for me to say at that conference. What I wanted to do was to go down to the street, find an Aboriginal woman, invite her upstairs, and get her to tell these leaders in the justice system what it feels like to be an Aboriginal woman on the streets of Winnipeg. Because the people in that room had no clue. They were still talking about tinkering with the justice system without recognizing that the justice system is broken. It has never worked. We've had the common law for over 1,000 years. We've had criminal codes for more than 1,000 years. We've used the principle of deterrence and punishment for all of that time. And we have not solved criminality with it. It doesn't work. The civil law doesn't work either. Business has learned to stay away from courts. They found more efficient, faster ways of solving disputes than taking them to court. The only people using the civil courts are people who are using delay to keep polluting, keep damaging, keep hurting. It takes decades to get an action through the civil courts if you can afford to do it. Those systems don't work. They're broken. The whole justice system is a failure. And that's what we keep reaching for. We keep reaching for this broken, useless system that is causing more hurt than help. And as Aboriginal people, we've got to figure out how we're going to survive when the courts are destroying our children, taking them away from us, putting them in foster homes or into youth detention centers. For our own survival as Aboriginal people, we've got to find our way out of this. We've got to find a way to start healing some of that trauma. It's only through healing the trauma we're going to get past the cycles of trauma. And policing isn't helping. Police show up too late Police aren't going to stop the violence in the community because the police don't get there until the violence has already happened. Police aren't going to stop the rapes, the sexual assaults, and most of them they're never told about. And if they are told, it's too late. It already happened. Police are not going to stop the abuse of elders, the abuse of children. As always, police are always too late. They're called after it happened. So your students, you're going through law school. You're looking at your career. What future do you have? Many of you are idealistic. You want to change the world. You want to make it into a better place. And you can. It is possible. Despite everything that I've said about the broken justice system and all of its failures, there is a glimmer of hope. I learned one thing prosecuting, and that is when you give a shit, people respond. I had a guy that I gave a unique sentence to. Instead of sending him to jail, I got him to report to the police station twice a day and blow into a breathalyzer to prove that he was sober. Because I knew this guy only acted up when he was intoxicated. And if he could stay sober, he could stay in the community. He wouldn't be a danger. It worked. This is a guy with a long criminal record. The previous sentence that I asked a judge to give him was 1 year incarceration. When we got out of jail, he was acting up again. So the next time he came before the judge, or came to court, and this last one was because he had hit his mother. And usually if you hit your mother, and I'm prosecuting, you can expect to go to jail for a long time. But this time I decided, let's try something different. And we give him a chance. 6 months after, we gave him a 6-month conditional sentence order that basically said, stay sober, report to the police twice a day, and blow into a breathalyzer. And we didn't have to put any other conditions on him. 6 months after that conditional sentence order was over, I went to the police and asked them how they felt about the sentence. And the police liked it. They liked it because the guy showed up every day, or showed up twice a day. They didn't have to worry about him. They didn't have to check up on him. He was polite. And the police were good with the order. I talked to the offender's employer, and the employer liked it because he showed up for work every day. And the employer was close with their employee. They knew that he had family problems. They knew that he had a young girlfriend who still liked to party and was causing him some grief. And they cared about him. I talked to the probation officer who supervised the conditional sentence order, and this is where I found out about giving a shit. The offender told his probation officer that he didn't want to breach the order because he did not want to disappoint Harold Johnson. And that was a surprise for me. I had shown this offender that I gave a shit. And because I did that, he didn't want to disappoint me. When I interviewed the offender, and again, this is a year after he was sentenced, And there was a year that he did not show up in police reports anywhere. He wasn't in their computer system anywhere. Not only did he not breach, he wasn't in the back seat of a car they pulled over. He wasn't sitting at a party that they were called to. He was nowhere in the police system for over a year. And when I asked the offender what he thought of the order, the CSO order, and asked him to rate it between 0 at the worst and 10 at the best, he gave it a 7. So that's one. One time when I showed an offender that I gave a shit, and he responded. The next one was in the far north. And I had this guy with a real long criminal record, and he was behaving violently again. And he was in custody, charged with several offenses. And he was asking to be let out on bail. And I told his lawyer, no way. There's no way this guy's getting out on bail. And the lawyer came back and said, my client wants to talk to you. And I said, that's no problem. I'll talk to your client. I'll tell him to his face there's no way he's getting out of jail. Not with his criminal record. So I went into the interview room and talking with him. And in the course of our conversation, he said, I've never been given a break. And I said, bullshit. Everybody gets a break. And I opened up his criminal record to show him the breaks that he'd gotten. And I saw that the very first offense that he was convicted of resulted in jail. And of course, if you've been to jail once, every time you come before the courts, you go back to jail. And it was true. He'd never been given a break. So I said, well, the RCMP are going to be really pissed at me. I'm going to give you a break. Because everybody gets one break. That order that we put him on, and I made it really strict. Curfew, a strict curfew, no alcohol, no drugs, no contact. Just about everything I could put into a bail order, we put into his bail order. And he didn't breach. That order where he got a break, where somebody gave a shit about him, he did not breach. That's a difference that we can make. There's a study, and I don't have it right at my fingertips, but there was a study done in Saskatchewan of probation officers. And they took one group of probation officers and they trained them to be empathetic. And they had another group of probation officers who didn't get the training. 2 years later, they looked at the results. And the clients of those probation officers who were trained to be empathetic, to show that they gave a shit, those clients had recidivism rates 15% lower than the clients of the probation officers who didn't get the training. And of the probation officers who really worked the program, who really gave a shit, their clients had recidivism rates 19% lower. So this is something for the justice system, something to consider as you're going into your profession, how you can make a difference. And it's simple. Just give a shit. Show your clients that they're human beings and that you care about them. And they'll respond. You can make a difference. Hi. Kagadaw na wako maganak. all my relations. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Harold. And thank you to everyone who has joined us online today. We hope you can join us again next Monday, October 19th, when we present the third episode of Re-Envisioning Policing in Canada with Senator Gwen Boniface, former Commissioner of the Ontario Provincial Police. Thanks for joining us.